I remember way back in the earliest days of my Christian journey how I would avidly read as much of the scriptures as I could. I had absolutely no clue what I was doing as I was reading. I didn't know where to start with the Bible, and interpretively speaking, I had no means of processing what I was reading in terms of what it would mean, who had written it, who it was written for. All I knew was that I had become a Christian, and that reading the Bible is what Christians do every day in what they call their quiet time. So that's what I did. I read the Bible every day. And honestly, in those earliest days, it's fair to say that most of what I was reading went right over my head. I didn't get it. I was absolutely lost in some parts of it. Genesis and Exodus were okay. I could remember most of those names and stories from the lessons of my childhood in Sunday school. But when I got to Leviticus and Numbers, well, my eyes just glazed over. But reading the Bible is what Christians do every day. So I persisted. I persisted in my confusion and lostness, and often felt like I was making no progress whatsoever. But once every so often, I would come across a sentence that would affirm that it had been the right thing to give my life to Jesus Christ and to be attempting to walk in the ways of Christ. These would be verses that I felt like I could understand. Verses that spoke to my life and to my very soul. Verses such as Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will direct your steps. Or Psalm 27, verses 1 and 2. That was another one. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? I would find that when I read verses like those, I was encouraged to continue trusting the Lord with all my heart. And I could hear a word telling me that I have no need to be afraid. A very important word for any young adult, right? These verses gave me courage. They spurred me on. In fact, I think that I would go as far as to say that the words of Bible verses like these actually sustained my faith in those earliest days. The fact that I didn't really understand any of the rest of what I was reading in there was okay, because I had words like these to cling to and to keep me going. Now, some people call Bible verses like these life verses, or we might simply refer to them as our most favorite verses, or the most meaningful Bible verses. I'd love to know what some of your life verses or your most meaningful Bible verses are. Perhaps you might type some of them into the comments feed and share them with one another. Be encouraged by one another in that way. These verses that we've read today from Lamentations have become life verses for me in recent weeks. Before I go into a little bit more about why these words have been so meaningful for me, it's more helpful for us to think about why they were so meaningful to the author who first wrote them. The book of Lamentations in the Old Testament is one of the most raw and honest books in the whole canon of Scripture. We can't be sure exactly who the author is, but many have concluded that this book is written by Jeremiah the prophet, and that he is writing it right after the fall of Jerusalem in 587 BC. In contrast to their humble beginnings as the Hebrew people rescued from slavery in Egypt, Israel had gone on to become prosperous, mighty, and victorious as a nation in its region. But as that went on, there was a price to pay. The more Israel succeeded and prospered, the more she forgot the God who had rescued her. The more she forgot the call that had been placed upon this nation to be God's distinctive people in the world. This loss of focus, this distraction, was what had led to the fall and destruction of Jerusalem. The city had fallen, and the nation was a shadow of its former self. The book of Lamentations is a collection of 5 laments as to the state of the nation and what it has become. One preacher whose thoughts on this text I was reading this week describes Lamentations as the words of the weeping prophet singing the blues over the people of Israel and the city of Jerusalem. In chapter 3, this lament turns personal. Verse 1 of chapter 3 reads, "I am the one who has seen affliction." And then what follows is 20 verses outlining the personal pain and anguish of the author in light of the loss of his city and nation. Verses 16 through 18 have the author's lament rising to its climax of complaint as he says these words. He, that is God, has made my teeth grind on gravel and made me cower in the ashes. My soul is bereft of peace. I have forgotten what happiness is. So I say, gone is my glory and all that I had hoped for from the Lord. I think it's fair to say that this author has hit rock bottom. He is bereft of peace. He has forgotten what happiness is. Gone is his glory and all that he had hoped for. But then the whole text turns. Having expressed his anguish and lament, this author has a significant moment in which his perspective entirely changes. In the 20 verses leading up to our reading, the writer of Lamentations has pointed the finger at God, blaming God for all that has happened to the nation and for all that has happened to him personally. But then the text turns as he says these words. But this I called to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. In making this turn and in writing these words, the writer of Lamentations makes a broad and sweeping statement that says to you and me and anyone else who's willing to receive it, that even when we hit rock bottom, even when we feel lost and despairing, even when we sense that all hope is lost in our lives because of the circumstances we find ourselves in, even in times like these, the goodness of God and the hope that comes with it can be remembered, can be called upon, and can be that which sustains us through the hard moments we are experiencing. In this text, we are reminded of a couple of simple things. Simple things that I believe are some of the most important things that we, people of the Christian faith, need to remember. The first is this, that God's love is a steadfast love. Now this term, steadfast love, is a translation of the Hebrew word. We've used it before in church here, chesed. Now, I say it's a translation, but really it's more of an interpretation because there's really no direct translation of this word that can fully embrace and describe its meaning. Different versions of the Bible will render this word in different ways to help us to try and understand what it is that is at the core of this Hesed love of God, which is that it is a loyal, faithful, constant, and unbreakable love. Now, isn't that good news? Regardless of what you're going through, regardless of how unlovely or unlovable you feel, regardless of how frustrated and angry you are at your circumstances, regardless of the finger pointing and fist shaking you are doing at God, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. Whether you know it or not, get it or not, accept it or not, or like it or not, God's love for you is constant and unfailing. Or, as the Apostle Paul puts it in the New Testament in his letter to the Roman Church, nothing can separate us from God's love. God's love is a steadfast love, and God's mercies never come to an end. My friends, the love of God is unconditional. It is given to us, to you and me, because of who God is, not because of who we are. And God is a God of promise. A promise-keeping God who has promised to love us with an everlasting love and who has promised to shower mercy after mercy upon us. There is no end of the earth that we can run to escape the love and mercy of God. There is no corner that we can back ourselves into where the love and mercy of God does not already exist. There is no offense we can commit that will rescind the love and mercy of God. So when all seems lost, destroyed, and broken beyond repair in our lives or in the life of the world around us, hope is not lost, because the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end, and they are new every morning. Every morning. Now again, come on. Isn't that great news? You see, I don't know about you, but I know that there are mornings when I open my eyes and when I breathe consciously for the first time that day, my brain is not always aware of new mercies. I am not always cognizant of God's great love first thing in the morning. Perhaps the thought of the day ahead is weighing on me, or perhaps there's an ongoing life situation that seems impossible to overcome and too much to handle. How important it is in those moments to remember that the mercies of God never come to an end, that they are new every morning. How important in those moments to remember that the grace and mercy of God is sufficient always to bring us through every single moment and situation in our lives. Having offered his lament and having called to mind the ceaseless love and mercy of God, this writer finds himself then arriving at a conclusion that enables him to proclaim a heartfelt word to God. Great is your faithfulness. He's no longer making statements about God. No, he has made them already. In this moment, in these words, he is internalizing the truth of what he has just said about God. And in my mind, I have this mental image of the writer sitting on a hill, looking down over the city of Jerusalem, seeing the destruction that has been wrought upon his hometown. I can hear the anguish in his lament, and I can also see the light bulb moment when he calls to mind the ceaseless love of God. And I can hear, maybe I can even feel the writer's relief as he proclaims the realization that has arisen from his remembrance. Great is your faithfulness. He says it with a huge exhaling breath. And he could feel that relief from his head right down to his toes. He knows that when all else has failed, the love and the mercy of God and the faithfulness of God remain, and they always will. And that's why he can then write those words contained in verse 24. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore, I will hope in him. There is a peace that comes with the deep-set, even momentary realization that God's love, mercy, and faithfulness never fail. Jerusalem had fallen. The people had been taken captive and were now exiled. All seemed lost, and the outlook was bleak, except for the writer's ability to remember that the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases, his mercies never come to an end, and that they are new every morning. It is in this realization that the persistent light of hope is seen and felt by the writer. Now, most of you will be aware that today is only my second time in the pulpit since the beginning of August, and most of you will also be aware that there's been very good reason for that, as my family and I have journeyed with my mum to her life's end. I was at home and having a hard morning just before Mum passed, struggling to take in everything that was going on. The whole situation was weighing heavy upon me. I went out for a run that day, and as I made my way around the wee loop in Mum and Dad's home village, I found myself praying, trying to find some release or some peace in the middle of my trouble. From somewhere, I was able to recall these words that I'm preaching on today, and I started to say them aloud as I ran. I would breathe in and say, "The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases." Then I would breathe out, saying, "His mercy never comes to an end." Another breath in, "They are new every morning." And then a huge exhale, "Great is your faithfulness." I did that again and again that morning. Thankfully, Mum and Dad lived in a small village in the countryside in the middle of nowhere, and nobody could hear me except for the cows and the sheep, and they didn't care. What I found was that the more I recited these verses, the more I said them, the deeper the truth contained them crept into my soul. And at the end of the run, I knew that things were going to be okay. I knew that Mum would be okay. I knew that my siblings and I would be okay. I knew that even though these moments and this season in life is hard, everything is going to be okay. Because the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is God's faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, and therefore I will hope in him. And my friends, that is my witness today, that the love of God is real and that it is sustaining. I know what I'm living with today, but I don't know what you're living with today. I hope that as you've heard me say those words again and again in this sermon, that you're beginning to take them in for yourselves. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul, and therefore I have hope. Friends, whatever is going on for you at the minute, whatever you're looking out in the world around you and seeing, whatever is causing you dismay or difficulty, may these words of the writer of Lamentations be words that give you great hope as you are reminded of the unconditional and never failing love of God and of its sufficiency to carry you through this day and every day. As I close, I want to offer you a challenge this week. I want to invite you just to take these words from these verses, Lamentations 3, 21 through 24. Take them this week and do your best to commit them to memory so that you might be able to say them when you need to say them. I would encourage you each morning this week just to repeat them a couple of times. If you're having a difficult moment through the day, maybe just step back from it a little bit and recite these words, or write them down in a journal or on a piece of paper, whatever it takes to make the truth of these words that is contained within them dive deeper and deeper to find rest and to take root in your soul. I encourage you to do that this week. I think these are words that can bring a space of healing into the midst of whatever it is we are going through. These are words that can remind us of the peace of God that does indeed pass all understanding, but which will indeed reign in our hearts when we give it space to. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Friends, each week at the end of our online sermon, we have a few questions to help you think through what it is that you've been hearing today. So here are this week's questions. And my friends, that brings us to the end of our service today. Again, we are grateful and thankful that you have joined us here. We invite you to join us again next week. Our digital worship service will go out at 11 a.m. on Sunday morning on our YouTube channel, just as it always does. Or if you're in town and you're able to join us in person, we invite you to come and join us here. We have services at 8 a.m. in the sanctuary, 9:30 here in Maxwell Hall, and 11 a.m. back in the sanctuary. We would love to welcome you to this space and worship together in person with you. In the meantime, please receive this benediction. Beloved children of God, go in peace as those who know and who feel deeply that the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Go as those who know that God's faithfulness is great. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.